Welcome back, dear students. I remind you that we are looking at the chapter on research methodology. The section we're dealing with today is difficulties in implementing a research strategy. In this lesson, I will address the issues surrounding the research journey. It consists of selection of a research topic, funding, access, sampling, methods of data collection, decision on the research tools, interpretation of the research findings, generalization, ethical issues. We are talking about how to do research. You will soon realize that there are many aspects of research that we should take into consideration right from the start. And this is what we call the difficulties, the issues that will hinder our progress and that we should address straight away, or we should be aware of right at the start of our research journey. If you are using IGCSE Sociology coursework by Blundell, you will find it on page 17 in a table at the bottom. However, some of the issues are addressed in the other sections of the book, but I'm going to put it in one place for you here so as to give you an overall picture of this topic. I started off with this picture. It shows somebody trying to do something very challenging, difficult, and yet usually satisfying. And this is what precisely research is for the sociologist. The sociologist knows that he's going on a journey into the unknown. It might be beautiful, it might be challenging. He doesn't know what he can expect out there, but he's ready to take the plunge. The sociologist usually has a lot of questions in his mind. How will I do this research? Will I get enough data which I'm expecting? Will people be open to talk to me? Do I have enough time? Will I get enough funding for this research? Will I be allowed to do this research? And so on. Let's now try and answer these questions one by one. Right at the start, while selecting a topic for research, the sociologist should ask himself a few questions. Can I research this topic? Will I get enough data? Can I research this topic means, is it something which I can do without intruding into the privacy of people, for instance? Can I get enough data? Is there enough information out there for me to be able to do this research? We should be very careful, especially in social science research, because what might appear to be easy might happen to be a quite complex topic to investigate. Another problem with research is that of getting funding. Research is a costly exercise, and the researcher has to sustain himself as well. Sometimes researchers get funding from companies. They should be very careful because some companies may have vested interest, and this type of research may be risky because sometimes the researcher may be at the mercy of the financiers, those people who are funding the research, and this may hinder his impartiality or his ability to say what he has found exactly. You must have heard even natural scientists have these problems. They get funded, and the companies, the organizations which fund them, expect them to do some research which justifies some of the issues that they would wish to see or hear. This is a big dilemma in research, and social scientists also are not sheltered from such problems. So funding is a problem, but we should be careful where the funds are coming from so that there are no strings attached and the researcher is able to say what he finds freely and openly. Another issue is that of getting access. The sociologist should obtain permission from the people or the authority from whom data is required. Sometimes, some people do not like others to research what they are doing. Sometimes it's not possible to observe or write anything, even report any findings, without the consent of the people one is researching. So therefore getting people to collaborate in research is not easy. Therefore, getting access to people whom you want to research is quite difficult and has to be carefully planned in advance. Another issue is deciding on a sample, which sometimes is quite difficult. We have dwelled on sampling in the last 3 lessons, and you must have noticed that the sociologist has to make several decisions. How big the sample should be, how representative it should be, how do I draw my sample, where do I get an adequate information about the sample frame, the population I want to study. Should I study a representative or can I study a non-representative sample? All these we discussed in the previous lessons, and therefore I won't go into dwell with it in too much detail here. But here you should also understand why it is important to decide on a proper sample. Usually sociological research may be criticized for the sample it has chosen. The sample may be judged to be inadequate by critics, and therefore the sociologist must be very careful that all the significant variables have been considered. This is very important for the positivist, in fact. For qualitative methods also, there are certain important decisions to be made. For example, they should understand what events they're going to observe. So therefore, what to observe, where to observe is also an issue that has to be carefully sorted out. So different types of issues that have to be addressed while talking about sampling. The positivist sample the people to investigate, while the qualitative sociologists will have to sample the events, what to observe, when to observe, and where to observe. Closely associated with sampling is also the issue of generalization. The sociologist should decide whether it is appropriate to generalize the findings from a sample to a population, and this can be objectionable if the sample is not carefully drawn. This is usually the case for positivists. Interpretive sociologists study non-representative samples and are not interested in generalization, as we have already spoken about it before. The next problem that any sociologist will face is to decide on the research tools and the methods of data collection that they would prefer. The positivist, for instance, would like to start with the development of the research tools such as questionnaires, interview, which they would use to gather information. The interpretive sociologist may have some more flexibility, but they also should decide on the precise questions that they would like to investigate and the type of research methods that they would use. To be more precise, the problem faced by sociologists in the development of research tools is quite complex and needs to be carefully tackled. The positivists, for instance, how they decide on the exact questions to ensure that the questionnaire would allow them to reach an understanding of the problems they want to study. Therefore, they have to ensure the validity of the research tools. That is, whether the questions they set would help to understand the problem they are about to investigate. The questions they would set have to be very carefully designed and piloted. We have spoken about piloting in the past. Please refer to that again. Similarly, the interpretive sociologist also faced with the problem of carefully designing the observation or interview schedules and implementing it as well to stay focused on what they set out to study and to ensure that the respondents are not deviating from the subject. So, data collection, development of the tools are all difficult issues to deal with while doing research, and therefore everything has to be carefully planned. You must have guessed by now the problems of doing research are not over. Let's look at another problem, that of filling the questionnaire and the trust that the sociologist can have from the respondents. For instance, very often people don't fill questionnaires, don't return the questionnaires sent to them by post. It is known that sometimes as little as 25% people will respond to a postal questionnaire. If the sociologist is lucky, up to 50% may respond to the questionnaire. So therefore, if people don't respond, it may affect the representativeness of the sample. We'll address this issue later when you look at the problems with questionnaire. There may also be a problem with those who respond. Sometimes people may lie, or sometimes people may not tell the whole truth, or they may answer in such a way as to give a different image of themselves. All these affects the validity, in other words, the authenticity of the findings that we get from a questionnaire. We'll address these issues later on as well. Using interviews also has its share of problems. For instance, can we trust the respondents? People may not always reply truthfully in an interview. This might be a problem with the questionnaire as well, in fact. But the interviewer has to be very tactful to ask the right question and to check the validity of the answers. Sociologists using an interpretive method engage in longer conversation, which may help them to check the truth, the validity of the findings, because people open up in a conversation after some time. And therefore, the sociologist should be able to gain confidence of the respondents as the interview proceeds, and the researcher establishes a good rapport. All this depends on the skill of the researcher, very much on the skill of the researcher, in fact. Another problem or dilemma of doing research resides on developing observation skills, especially for the interpretive sociologist. It is necessary that the researcher has good observation skills. For example, he should know what to focus on, what are the objectives of the research, because we are all aware that we may all look at the same thing, but we may not see the same thing. And therefore, the observation of a classroom, for instance, the observer should decide beforehand what he would observe and for how long he would observe and what would be the objectives of his observation. After that, there's also the issue of noting down everything that has been observed, which might be very cumbersome at times and even difficult. And therefore, everything has to be well planned beforehand. Interpretation of findings is also an important issue. The sociologist still has the problem of interpretation of the findings and drawing conclusions. All this demands good research skills, knowledge of data collection, and interpretation. However, we also see that sociologists and even natural scientists disagree with each other, do not interpret the data in the same manner. For instance, a feminist sociologist or a male sociologist may not interpret an issue having to do with women in the same manner. Not that they are being biased, but sometimes as human beings, they tend to concentrate on different aspects of the problem. And this is where disagreement occurs at times. As I told you, while talking about interpretation of findings, there's usually a lot of controversy which cannot be avoided. Even positivists and natural scientists face this problem and are subject to criticisms. Natural scientists, for instance, disagree with each other, for example, on the complex issue of global warming, which is still a controversy. Some countries refuse to understand or to accept that global warming is a problem that has to be looked into as soon as possible. These scientists may in fact be influenced by who is funding their research and for whom they are working. So all these are difficult issues that any researcher or anybody reading research should be aware of. The next problem or difficulty that sociologist or any researcher faces with research is to dealing with ethical issues. That is, will it be morally proper to investigate people and to speak freely about their problems? This is another complex issue which we'll discuss in the next lesson. By now, you must have discovered that research is quite a complex issue. But if you dare to venture into this jungle, you must have also realized that you will certainly find something of beauty in there. And this is what researchers do. In this lesson, we looked at the difficulties of developing a research strategy. We looked at selecting a research topic, getting funding, getting access, sampling, the problem of generalization, developing the research tools, trusting respondents, developing observation skills, and the problems of interpretation of findings. Let us now look at some of the questions on this topic. What is a research dilemma? 2 marks. Identify 2 examples of problems sociologists encounter while doing research. 4 marks. How could funding institution hinder research? 4 marks. Explain the problem related to getting access for research. 6 marks. How could selection of a topic be a problem for sociology? 6 marks. Explain 2 problems associated with designing a research project. 8 marks. Assess the view that designing and implementing a research strategy is a difficult process. 15 marks. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I wish to remind you that you may write to me on varma2011@gmail.com if you wish to get any additional information or support. I would also wish to point out that the illustrations in this presentation was taken from an open source abstracts.com. So I hope to see you soon for another lesson. So until then, it's goodbye.